Thank you all for being here, and thank you to all of the people that have worked to make this incredible conference happen. Your work is appreciated so much, and we are lucky to have you all making a difference in the community of ceramic makers in Indiana. The actions of the organizers of this conference are perfect examples of what this talk is about, and I'm truly honored to be a small part of it. So I'm going to talk about a concept I've been referring to as the Clay Commons. I'll define what a commons is, how we are a part of it, and what we can do to foster and support its expansion. But first, I'll start with a little bit about myself and how I've come to appreciate and use the Clay Commons as a means for support, for inspiration, and for meeting and engaging with some of the most amazing people I've ever met. These images were taken at last year's NCECA conference at the reception for Polyvocality, Solidarity in the Time of Political Rupture. This was an online exhibition that I worked on with my good friend Rahala Filsufi. It was first launched on ArtAxis, and then we screened a video of the work at a reception at NCECA. Polyvocality was an effort to support Iranian artists who are making work about the political strife in Iran, and I was so honored to help realize the exhibition that I can't help but feel so incredibly fortunate to be in a position to be around such amazing artists. When I see these images like the ones on the screen here, I just feel very, very lucky. I've also been very lucky to have had great teachers, people like Christopher James at the Art Institute of Boston, and Don Bendel, Paula Rice, and Ellen Tibbetts at Northern Arizona University. Gave me the encouragement to seek out a career that was very different from what I thought I wanted when I first started working with them. Don Bendel has been the largest mentor in my professional life, and working with him for all of the years that I did showed me that what I really wanted was to give back to others through teaching, mentorship, and building community, as he did for the community in and around Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. He was a professor who had the courage to say, "I don't know," but then he always followed it with, "Let's figure it out." And that is something that stays with me still today. I also saw in Don Bendel a way to value a life of many pursuits, and I have tried to mirror that in my own life. I try to be an artist, teacher, father, husband, community member, community builder, activist, and lifelong learner. I see these different aspects of my life as spokes on a wheel, knowing that the wheel isn't always perfectly round. It gets oblong or jagged when I become pulled in different directions for deadlines and that kind of thing, but in the end, I want my life to be about a lot of things, and I seek fulfillment towards that end in simultaneous pursuits. I teach and run the ceramics program at Indiana University Southeast in New Albany, Indiana. I've been there for 15 years, and in that time, I think we've built a pretty cool little ceramics program down there on the Ohio River in Southeast Indiana. I started a resident artist position that helps recent MFA grads bridge the gap between school and a career in the ceramics field. This position rotates every couple of years and helps bring new voices and perspectives that are different than my own into the program. My current resident is Sarah Zimmerman, a recent graduate from the MFA program at Ball State University. I built a teaching website called Clay Bucket that integrates with the program. I host an active visiting artist program and started a post-baccalaureate program and try to foster an atmosphere of research into the things that offer wonderment. Community is a big part of our program at IU Southeast. It's been my experience that students make the best work when they are supported and when they are in a supportive environment. So I put concerted effort into building and maintaining a community that fosters collective as well as individual learning. I founded the Dirtbags Art Club, which helps enrich our community and provide opportunities for students to enhance their learning. And actually, there are a bunch of dirtbags in the audience here today. So that's a little bit about my background. I've been making work for nearly 30 years, and there are threads in that work that go all the way back to my teenage years. For the sake of time, I'll start the conversation at a more recent juncture and at a moment that has changed my work and allowed me to grow as an artist. In the summer of 2014, Soji Satake and I were hosted at Tethon 3D for a 2-week residency. We worked with the people there to design digital 3D models and print them in a clay powder printing process. This experience kicked off a body of work that in many ways was much different than the work I had intended to make at the time. But it's a reminder that as artists, we need to be vigilant and stay open to how influences can impact our work. Going into the experience, I was interested in creating a digital model of a stack of plates, and then printing the stack as one clay print. What ultimately happened, though, was that I became more interested in the scaffolding structure underneath the piece. That scaffolding was just a support structure, it was meant to be thrown away. Getting back into my own studio, I kept thinking about that scaffolding. Not having a 3D clay powder printer of my own, I remade a version of the piece I made at Tethon 3D using the plainest, most boring plates I could find, the JCPenney Home Collection plates, and I supported them with this rudimentary scaffolding I made from glued together pieces of fired ceramic. This piece is not good. It's sort of painful for me to even look at. But the important thing about this piece is that it was a catalyst that allowed my work to pivot to a body of work that I pursued for many years. That piece kicked off the scaffolding series works, and in this body of work, I was interested in the relationships between hand and machine-made objects. In this body of work, I focus on the significance of the JCPenney brand as a uniquely American icon, specifically the JCPenney Home Collection. JCPenney employs the word home to brand this collection of utilitarian dinnerware, which, because of its mass-produced and monotonous nature, do not contain the qualities that would normally be associated with the notion of home. When one thinks of home, we think of all the intangibles of the place. We think of the smells, the colors, the light coming through a window, the people and the pets you have in the home. You think of all the things that make it uniquely your home. By appropriating these vessels and suspending them in a scaffolding structure that is handmade with ceramic material, I am creating a support structure that is shaped by the very thing it is supporting, emphasizing the influence that mass production has on cultural norms and customs. With this in mind, I built these quasi-handmade scaffoldings to isolate and study these JCPenney pots. Focusing in on the Home Collection logo, I aim to highlight their co-opting of that word by referencing architectural and house-like structures in the forms I build around them. The scaffolding is also a reference to the study or repair of something, as buildings are often wrapped in scaffolding when they are being restored or repaired. I spent months on each one of these works, and that slow pace allowed me the opportunity to analyze every angle on these vessels as if it were an architectural structure and I was standing on the scaffolding myself. I appreciated how these works created situations for forms to respond to and influence each other's role as part of a whole. The process of building these pieces was extremely slow. I would extrude clay through a custom 3D printed extruder die to create those pieces. They are 1/4 of an inch thick when they're wet, so they're about 3/16 of an inch when they're fired. After extruding a whole bunch of pieces, I fired them to cone 2 in an electric kiln, and then set myself to the very slow process of gluing them together using PC7 epoxy mixed with black mason stain. This particular piece has over 3,000 individual pieces in it, and it took me a month to build it, working every day throughout the duration of a month-long residency at Red Lodge Clay Center. And yes, I did a month-long residency and I only made one piece. This image is a good example of the way I was using the epoxy to highlight the connection points between the pieces. And this is the last piece I made in this body of work, and I wish I was one of those artists who was able to follow a logical and linear path in their work, but I just haven't been able to do that. During the process of making this work, I was invited to give a lecture at ScanCeram, which is a Scandinavian ceramics conference in Tonle, Denmark. As the conference ended, I took a trip up to Skane, a small town at the northernmost tip of Denmark. It's at the end of this peninsula that sticks out of the top of Denmark. And out on that peninsula are these World War II bunkers, and I was so struck with these objects. They are so beautiful, the way that they are slowly sinking into the sand and being swallowed by the earth. I love how these powerful objects that are meant to be impenetrable, but as time goes by, they are being overtaken. And the way the earth is reclaiming these structures is so beautiful. On a purely visual level, I loved the way the bunkers looked when the earth was overtaking them. I also appreciated the metaphor here, that these objects of conflict, given enough time, succumb to the shifting landscapes of time. And this idea kind of stuck with me for a while, and there were a couple years where it just sort of simmered on the back burner of my mind. Then I was invited to be part of the Mid-Atlantic Ceramic Exchange in Reykjavik, Iceland, and decided that the change of scenery would be a good moment to throw myself into a new body of work. A local Icelandic artist took me out into the forest to find some of the old bunkers that looked out over Reykjavik. During that short residency, I started working on my bunker series body of work, and it continues to this day. In these pieces, I'm creating these bunker forms that are sinking and listing into the landscape around them. In his book Bunker Archaeology, French cultural theorist and philosopher Paul Virilio writes that however impressive the ramparts may be, they owe their value to being constantly and totally manned and occupied. In the bunker series work, I reference my experience visiting the bunkers, as well as the range of metaphors the bunkers can encompass. On the one hand, they are objects of aggression, but on the other hand, they are objects of protection. They are often entrenched on beautiful beaches and hillsides, creating an odd juxtaposition between their former menacing power and the current landscape. As Paul Virilio states, their power and their purpose is owed to human occupation. When the reasons for their occupation become obsolete, their power also vanishes. In this work, I partly use the bunker to symbolize the war machine in the United States, but also the futility of our armed occupations. I am also interested in the bunker as a political metaphor and how it can be used to reference entrenched ideology. Often it is an entrenched ideology that can lead to the construction of the bunkers in the first place. Deeply rooted ideas can seem immovable, but when the landscape around them changes, so too can the foundations that support those ideas. Like the sand and water slowly overtaking those bunkers in Denmark, one-time powerful ideologies can be overtaken by shifting thought processes. Many of the political events in the world recently have me feeling like I want to crawl into a bunker. There's such this dynamic atmosphere, like it's either this thing or that, and there's no middle ground. That entrenchment of philosophies is not healthy and has me worried about the future, especially because I now have a 3-year-old daughter and I worry about her future in this country. While it may not seem like it, there is a little hope in this work, though. The ideas in this work also show that however entrenched an ideology may seem, our shifting landscape will eventually unmoor that ideology. And as the landscape changes, my hope is that the bunkers become obsolete and sink into the terrain, like the bunkers I saw on those trips to Denmark and Iceland all those years ago. And this is one of the works I have in the show here. This is one of the most recent pieces, finished just a couple of weeks before it made the journey to come up here to Bloomington. And I feel something in this work that is beckoning me for change, so we'll see where this work is going in the upcoming months and years. I think it's a good thing that I'm never really certain exactly where the work will end up. No matter what I end up making, though, all of it has been made possible because of the knowledge of those that came before me. Because people shared information with me, my peers, mentors, teachers, and people in the field who shared their knowledge, and now I'm able to make this work. Sometimes I think back on the incremental steps that led me here. Take this recipe, for example. One of my resident artists at IU Southeast, Chanda Z, shared this recipe with me because she knew I was looking for an orange firing clay body. That was nearly 10 years ago, and I'm still using it in my pieces today. It has spanned 2 bodies of work and dozens of pieces. Countless hours have been spent working with this clay body, and it was freely shared with me. Chanda got this recipe from Angela Di Cosola at Florida Atlantic University, which is a place I've never been and from somebody I've never met. I'm sure the lineage of this recipe goes back much further than this, but I love the fact that one of my favorite clay recipes can be traced back through someone I've never met. And Chanda obviously wasn't the first to share a recipe with me. Countless others have, and recipes are passed through our community in lots of different ways. These are 2 I've had pinned to my studio wall for many years. And I've shared recipes with others as well, knowing that my ability to make a recipe came through the knowledge of others. Sure, I've tweaked recipes and made adjustments, but had I not worked with Mary Kay in Boston in 1995, where I saw her put sunflower seeds into her clay, or Don Bendel in the late 90s, where I saw him put perlite and sawdust into his clay, I would not have developed my own approach to mixing clay. This is the shared knowledge of the clay commons at work. Another example of shared knowledge impacting my work comes from a free class that Derek Au taught during the COVID shutdown. It was called Machine Learning for Artists, and in that 7 or 8 week course, he taught us how to create our own dataset of images and train machine learning software on those datasets to create new images and material. I had recently started my Bunker series works at the time, and with Derek's help, I used this technology to create source imagery. These are images generated by the machine. Basically, it's trying to create its own bunkers with the goal of creating images that are fake but made to look real. I take these images and I use them as inspiration when I make digital models of the bunker forms. I use a very low-tech 3D modeling software called Tinkercad to make these bunker forms. Tinkercad is a web-based 3D modeling tool that is really basic, intuitive, and easy to use. I love how simple it is. You can just start stacking and smushing forms together, cutting away or stretching the forms in a lot of different ways. It's a bit like a toy, but after using several other modeling softwares, Tinkercad is by far the most intuitive and simple to use. After I make the positive form, I create another form over the top of it, subtracting the positive to get the negative of the form. After I size these appropriately and prepare them for the 3D printer, I print the molds. And these larger ones will print for days. The one on the right printed for 90 hours. It's sort of like my new wood fire. And I like the fact that I'm using free software. I don't need a high-powered computer since the software runs on any web browser, and the printers I'm using are $500 or less. To me, it's a reminder that you can do some pretty cool things in this space without a ton of resources. Once I have the mold printed, I press mold clay into molds in a manner that is essentially how I used to build the large monument forms I made in undergrad and graduate school. These are some of the forms when they come out of the molds. The white residue is from the cornstarch I use to powder the molds, which allows them to more easily release the clay objects. I am purposefully printing the molds on settings that maximize the ridges so that the surface references the way concrete casts, like how the bunkers that inspire these forms often show the patterns of the equipment used to hold the concrete in place as it sets. I've been 3D printing for over a decade, and I learned those techniques mostly from free online resources. I never took a class in it. I was able to learn it because other people shared that information. Isaac Newton said, "If I have seen farther than others, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." And I believe in this deeply, that we see far because the people that came before us shared information and built a commons that we all benefit from. So I'd like for you all to take a few moments and think to yourself, what parts of your work came to be because someone shared information with you? Maybe you're using a clay body that someone shared with you. Maybe some of the glazes you use were shared with you, or perhaps you learned some techniques in your work because someone shared those techniques with you. So let's think about this for a moment. Let's take like 10 seconds and just think about that. I'm guessing every single person in this room is thinking of several aspects of their work that have come to be because of the generosity of others. You have all benefited from the Clay Commons. So what is a commons? A commons is a shared resource that is collectively owned, managed, and used by the community. It can take various forms, including natural resources like the air and the water, digital assets like the internet itself, cultural heritage, and more. The idea of the commons is that it is rooted in communal ownership and stewardship, where individuals or groups cooperate to ensure the sustainable and equitable use of a resource. Our Clay Commons is the collective history, knowledge, and experience that we have in our community. It comes in the form of glaze and clay recipes, working knowledge of the material, kiln building techniques, firing schedules, and on and on. There are way too many things to list here, but the point is that the collective knowledge of clay that we access through online resources, friends and peers, teachers, and conferences like this one constitute a clay commons that we should foster, protect, and give back to. And the giving back part is something I want to stress here. At this point, I'm thinking there isn't anyone in this room that hasn't benefited from the shared knowledge of our clay community. I believe that if we take from our community, then we have a responsibility to give back to it and pay it forward for our peers and the next generation of clay makers. On November 12, 1990, Tim Berners-Lee published the first formal proposal for an information sharing project he was working on at the CERN laboratories in Geneva, Switzerland. That proposal was titled World Wide Web, Proposal for a Hypertext Project, and it would go on to become the World Wide Web and build the internet as we know it. I was a freshman in high school that year, and as with most people, I came to appreciate the internet first as a user of it. It wasn't until later that I began to realize that this thing I was using was a collective effort by real people, and I wanted to add something to it. I wanted to build something on this platform and something that could give back. In 2002, I bought this 1,200-page book on hypertext markup language, or HTML. As you can imagine, it was a real page-turner and launched my passion for building on the web. I started by writing my first website by hand in a text editor using only HTML. And that website was awful. It was just terrible, but it kicked me off on a path I'm still on more than 20 years later. I have been inspired by people like Aaron Swartz, who was a computer programmer, internet activist, writer, and someone who believed deeply in the ability of freely shared information to be a catalyst for change. He was a genius, and as a teenager wrote code that became Reddit, RSS feeds, the technology that Wikipedia is built on, and he also helped found Creative Commons, which is a licensing platform for creative work, as well as Demand Progress, an organization that fights to protect net neutrality and internet freedom. One of his quotes that has really stuck with me over the years is, "It's not enough to live in the world as it is." It's something so simple. It's not enough to live in the world as it is. To me, it's a charge to do something, to make change, to make the world a better place. At its core, the internet functions on the principle that if we all agree on the protocols, we can share information freely between each other. I believe strongly in the power of sharing information. It is part of my ethos and part of who I am. When we share information, we make our communities better, our field better, and we make each other better. These passions of sharing information and building things fostered a connection in me where I merged my love of the clay commons with my love of the digital commons. Claybucket and ArtAccess are born from these ideas. I founded both around the same time, Claybucket in 2006 and ArtAccess in 2005. They are very different and on much different scales, but the purpose is similar, to share information and to support and enrich our clay commons. I wrote and launched the first version of the ArtAccess website in 2005. At the time, most artists didn't have websites. There were some galleries that had websites, but they've siloed the contact information on the artists they represented, which made it harder to research artists. As a response, I developed ArtAccess as a free online platform that opened doors for artists to be found, researched, and impacted by the increased visibility that an open platform offers. In the years since, it has grown to be a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit or art organization with a global reach. There are now over 1,000 members in over 50 countries in all 50 states. At our core, we are artists supporting artists. For each of the artists on ArtAccess, there is a webpage to highlight their work, artist statement, profile photo, and other biographical information. The ArtAccess Fellowship is one of the most important programs, and the inspiration for it came during the keynote lecture that Theaster Gates gave during the 2014 NCCA conference. During that keynote, he gave a charge to the audience to diversify our field by doing more to support artists who have unfortunately been marginalized and underrepresented. I was in the audience that night, and my friend and fellow ArtAccess board member Samuel Johnson was sitting next to me. We were both so inspired by what Theaster was saying that as we slowly filed out of the room, by the time we got to the door, the idea for the ArtAccess Fellowship was born. We set to raising money and started planning, and in 2015, launched the call for entries for our first Art Access Fellowship. The fellowship now supports 2 artists each year to attend summer residency programs at Haystack Mountain School of Crafts. Tuition, room, board, and travel is all covered. This year, Lucky Mo and Alvaro Villa are our 2023 Art Access Fellows. And here are the rest of the Art Access Fellows to date. We view the fellowship as a long-term thing, so while the residency happens in the summer directly after receiving the fellowship, we continue to work with the fellows on projects far into the future. Meeting these folks and working with them has been one of the premier highlights of my career, and I just feel so lucky to be in a position to interact with them and be inspired by who they are and what they are doing for our field. We do a lot of programming and love events that help enrich and make our field a more vibrant place. An example of this is our Art Access Conversations program. We've tweaked this program many times over the years and are working on a new version of it right now. But this one was one of my favorites. In this particular year, we scheduled 24 artists to live stream video talking about their work and answering questions people had submitted. They streamed from their homes and studios from places like Thailand, Iran, Ireland, Botswana, India, literally all over the world. Each artist spoke for 30 minutes and the discussions were streamed live back-to-back for 12 hours straight. When I first founded Art Access, it was just a website, but as it grew, I was always uncomfortable with the idea of it being about me. For many years, I didn't even put my name on the Art Access emails. I didn't even put myself on the website until it had 20 members. As Art Access grew, I realized that it would be better aligned with my goals if it formed into a nonprofit. So in 2012 and 13, I formed it into Art Access Organization Incorporated, a federally recognized 501c3 nonprofit organization that is 100% membership and volunteer driven. I am the executive director, and the Art Access Board of Directors was formed to help realize the full potential of the organization. The board members are critical to the functioning of the organization, and we do nearly everything collaboratively. For me personally, it is truly my favorite part of working on Art Access. They are a talented and engaged board, and it is truly an honor to work with them. Clay Bucket is a website I built to archive teaching resources. While it is tailored for my students at IU Southeast, I have heard from many people that it is being used as a broader resource. There are now over 200 pages of teaching materials, all free to use. For my students, the hub of Clay Bucket is the online handbook section. Here they can find tutorials that are specific to the equipment we have in the studio, but also tutorials on things like how to ask someone for a letter of recommendation, what to look for in a graduate program, how to make 3D printed throwing ribs, and how to mix kill wash, how to use a damp box, and the list goes on and on. There are dozens of how-to videos, and if they are related to a specific piece of equipment in the studio, there's a QR code on that equipment that points to that particular page. This makes the studio more accessible for students who are not as comfortable with the space. My hope is that by demystifying the environment, it will make it easier, more accessible, and safer for students to use the space. The tutorials and how-to pages range broadly among topics, including topics such as how to mix epoxy, how to make a cone pack, and many other processes and techniques. I also share around 40 projects I use in my teaching. Many of these are built on the shared knowledge of others, and I'm happy to share them with whoever wants them. Each project page has the prompts for the project, images, and many have PowerPoints, videos, and other content. Basically, this is a growing resource, so I add more to the pages as I have time. I am happy that Art Access and Clay Bucket are two of many endeavors in our field to freely share information. One of my all-time favorites, and one that I am continually impressed with, is Glazy. If you don't know what Glazy is, you absolutely need to check it out. Glazy is a free and open platform for sharing clay and glaze recipes, firing schedules, and it has a robust web-based glaze calculation software with tons of amazing ways to calculate, archive, and share recipes. There are tens of thousands of glazes shared on the platform, and it is getting bigger and more global every day. This is just one example of a glaze on Glazy, but this one was generated by Derek using artificial intelligence. So a computer came up with this glaze, and look at it. It's beautiful. At IUS Ceramics, we use it to archive and test our recipes, and when I teach glaze calculation, I rely on it heavily. Derek Au created Glazy, and he writes the code and maintains the website on his own. To me, it's one of the most inspiring examples of a contribution to our field that is based on the belief that by sharing information we make our field better. Glazy is one of the most valuable contributions to our clay commons that I've ever seen. And I know not everyone has the programming knowledge to build Glazy or wants to suffer through 18 years of making clay bucket or art axis. I'm kidding about the suffering. Well, kind of. Anyway, my point is that when it comes to the health and vitality of our clay commons, small contributions matter. Uploading a glaze to Glazy matters. Participating in an art access event matters. Helping someone load a kill matters. If you have the resources, kicking in a few bucks a month enables projects like Glazy and Art Access to continue doing what they do. And that warm, fuzzy feeling you get when you help someone, that's dopamine being released into your system and making you feel better. Research by the Mayo Clinic says that volunteering reduces stress and increases positive and relaxed feelings. So in a way, if you need a selfish reason to help others, it's simply good for your own health. Research by the American Heart Association says that people who volunteer have less depression, less anxiety, higher self-esteem, higher life satisfaction, greater happiness, and a greater sense of meaning in life. And I don't know about you, but I had a hard time during the COVID shutdown. My sense of purpose and meaning lost its bearing, and I felt adrift. I don't know that I'm completely 100% grounded again, but getting back into the classroom and helping students become better artists, refocusing on art access projects, and being back at conferences like this one has helped immensely. Our community grounds us and helps us give us a sense of purpose and meaning. The support we give each other makes a difference in each other and by extension our clay commons. So my charge to you is this: go out and help someone. Do it for free. Help for the sake of helping. Support because you care. Every time you do something like that, you enrich the clay commons and make it a better, more accessible, and more welcoming place. Speaking from experience, I can tell you that my work with Art Access has been the opportunity of a lifetime. If it weren't for that early desire to give back, that desire to not just live in the world as it is, I simply would not have met and interacted with all of the people I have. Those relationships come from my volunteer work, and they mean the world to me. I believe deeply that each of us can give back in some way, so I ask that each of you consider how you can help others, how you can give back to a community that feeds you. When I've given back, I've learned a lot in the process. Since we are all here in the pursuit of learning stuff, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for their tireless dedication and commitment to the vitality of our clay commons here in Indiana. Seth Green, Al Holland, Chase Gamblin, Malcolm Mobutu Smith, Justin Rawshank, Todd Madison, Ted Neal, Linda Tien, Dick Lehman, Kira Enriguez, and our conference sponsors Amico Brent, Refractory Engineers, IU Bloomington, Purdue University Fort Wayne, and Ball State University. I'd also like to extend a big thank you to the Indiana University Arts and Humanities Council for awarding the Public Arts and Humanities Project Grant to support this conference. So let's give the organizers and volunteers that made this conference happen a big round of applause. And lastly, I want to thank each one of you for being here. I am truly honored and humbled to be on the stage, and I thank each of you for your time today. Thank you.